DHT. Rosie Dunn and Flanders Dunn were simply a northeastern couple. They were both quite active in their local Vermont community. They lived in the city but would take frequent trips out into the rural area to clear their minds and generally have some free space to think and simply be themselves. They found that spending time in nature would rejuvenate them. It helped them escape the hustle and bustle of the concrete jungle. Sure, they lived in Vermont, and it wasn't surely necessarily the commercial capital of the world or anything, but people did exist there. They had hopes and dreams, ambitions and fears like other people within planet Earth. Flanders always felt as if he absorbed the energies of those people around him and those in the concrete jungle. It also was where it would heavily weigh heavily on him. He couldn't explain it, but that's how it was. He had to find the solitude of nature to decompress and be away from the thoughts, actions, and behaviors of others. At the time, he needed to be in nature. It helped him to go there by himself or with Rosie. Flanders felt like he would go crazy if he didn't spend the right amount of time outside away from others. He always knew something was off, even while he worked with other oddball characters. He always felt as if he was otherworldly. It was almost as if he was waiting to be activated, as if he felt he was supposed to be on a mission but couldn't explain or what wasn't clear about what his mission was supposed to be. In the meantime, he was twiddling his thumbs. He excelled in the top universities. He went to MIT and Oxford, conversed with world-renowned scientists, productive innovators, and took on activities like hiking and always strived to fit and healthy. He was always knew the key part of success and he due to his fitness and mentality and physicality. Flanders always felt as he would draw energy and insight from the sun. It was another thing that he couldn't explain, as if he didn't have the right amount of sunlight, as if he couldn't function as properly. As a matter of fact, Flanders would get up early and let's go for a walk. He noticed that he would help him kickstart his mind. He would give him more insights and energy throughout the day as he practiced specific habits. Flanders knew that he couldn't compromise his physical health and mental health by drinking alcohol or taking drugs. They altered who he was. His perception, but it clouded his mind. It was surprising that he wouldn't spend a lot of time in nature. It forced him to keep his endurance and connect with what was real, all the while he couldn't shake the fact that he was still felt disconnected from what he was supposed to be doing. But things would start changing on that fateful day. On October 20th, 2022, they, Flanders and Rosie, were biking together along the dirt road. It had rained for several of the previous days, so the post-rain scent lingering in the air. They were enjoying their biking time. As it got dark, they saw a flash of light far ahead into the distance. They thought of that it was a vehicle of some sort that with a flashlight, maybe hunting late at night. But the light would not go away. They would seemingly get closer to the source, and then it would seem out more distant. It felt like something or someone was playing a game with them. Then they started out to hear a clicking noise. It seemed as if it was all around them, but they didn't see any movement or anyone or anything. At the same time, they were transfixed by the flashlights, flashes of lights. They kept on repeating to get closer to the light, and Flanders could have sworn he looked like a planetary being. He looked up and swore he saw a planetary being hovering at a great distance away from them. For some reason, memories flashed in Flanders' mind. He thought maybe it was a moon, a comet, or a star. Maybe why he wondered, did it come out of a view? It was strong enough, but then they couldn't see it at some point. They had, but then it almost disappeared. It made no sense. Planetary objects were huge, so they couldn't be so nimble. It's not like the moon comes in and out of view rather quick. When it comes, it continues there. It is the moon, for gosh, for Christ's sakes. Then something even stranger happened. Then supposed planetary being looked as if it swiftly headed in their direction. The light grew stronger and stronger. They felt they were almost blinded by it. The memories flashed in Flanders' mind. Flanders swore he thought he heard, "Don't be scared, Flanders. Go to the light." Memories flashed. Flanders was frozen for a second. Then Flanders got startled and quickly looked around to see if anyone was there. He turned to around. He couldn't. He didn't. He wanted to jump into the light. He didn't know what was going. He almost got into an accident with his wife Rosie, who was startled by the light, that she wasn't paying attention as quickly movement. He lost control of his bike. He fell to the floor quickly, got back up, and started running. He yelled, "Let's get back to the car." His wife regained her composure, and it was swiftly follows behind him. As they ran back to the car, it was as if the lights grew closer and closer. Somehow they made it safely to their vehicle and back to their house. They made it home and tried to sleep. They couldn't really discuss the incident. They were trying to process it themselves. Rosie was able to shake it off and fell asleep. Of course, Rosie was a heavy sleeper. She would jump in the bed and be found sound asleep. Flanders would a little different. He had to have everything go well for him to go to sleep. Last night, nothing was going well. Something wasn't sitting with him well. He felt drawn to the light and frightened by it. Why? What was so compelling about the light? At some time he was scared of it. He what did he fear? He felt even worse. He felt different. He couldn't exactly explain it, but something seemed off. He barely slept. By 5 a.m., he noticed Rosie got up early the next day. He closed his eyes and continued to try to get some shut-eye. Rosie, for her part, was on a mission. For some reason, she was driven to learn more about what they had just experienced. It was a very strange event. She was she had never witnessed anything like that in her entire life. She started off as anyone would. She wanted to see if there was any type of aerial activity that took place at that time. Rosie called the respected government agency in charge of monitoring aircrafts to see if there were any aerial vehicles in the area where they went out. They responded no such activity. This government agency did ask her exact coordinates, where she lived and who she was at the time of the incident. That this made her feel a bit uneasy, but she thought that was probably regular procedure for this government. After all, the government is always interested in protecting and serving its citizens. She thought she could reach out to the nearby Air Force Base. It took a few days for someone to respond to her. The representative was General Dunn. He was retired. He too questioned her further about the event, but she just shrugged it off. Something didn't seem right about the whole incident, and Rosie did what she did. She always started to do some digging. She was a researcher after all. Her first stop was her local library. When she researched there, she somehow ended up in the UFO aisle. Memories flashed. One book suddenly called out to her. She quickly grabbed it. She checked out a book by Ronald Goldbar, a retired Marine aviator who was the head of a national investigations committee on a variety of flight phenomenon. It was a non-government agency, but a respected agency. The author Ronald noted he did believe there was a superior otherwise beings that had a far superior technologies to humans. He also believed that the government was nearly aware of these other beings and other technologies and had went to greater lengths to keep this information a secret. Rosie cheeks turned red, and this typically happened when she had read or heard something rather intriguing, and her mind was blowing information. She was astounded by the finding. She was sitting in the library and reading a book and realized that it was dark, and only after the librarian tapped her on the shoulder and told her it was to be closing pretty soon. She was a bit startled by the tapping, but was so engrossed in this book. Rosie checked her phone to see around 15 missed calls and 20 missed text messages from Flanders. Rosalie quickly thanked the librarian for letting her know, gathered her things as she was getting up. She dropped her phone accidentally, and this was where she held her phone firmly and had it slipped out. It was more strange that it was seeming as if she had thrown her phone down with force, almost as if she was trying to see if it was indestructible. Strange, she thought. Very strange. Rosie looked at her phone to see if everything was all right. It looked like it was worked fine. She packed the book and headed home. Then when she was home, she noticed that Flanders was at the house. This wasn't the usual case. Flanders was a researcher. He would stay at the local campus and work on different projects. After a little conversation, then she realized that he didn't go to work that day. Then she asked him about it. He responded by nothing, that he wasn't feeling well. Rosie looked at him. He looked fine. Then when she pressed further, he glared at her and unlike him, and eventually told her that he had a splitting headache. Then she asked him if he took any medication. He said he, of course, did not. He never took medication unless absolutely necessary. Then he shot back a question at her. Where was she? Why was she gone for so long? What was she doing? A series of questions that surprised her, that never had interrogated her before during their marital lives. Her nerves were on edge, surprisingly as normal as very calm individuals. She was startled by how quickly she was getting agitated, then took a deep breath before answering, then curiously agated Flanders as she was out at the library researching and reading a book by a Marine aviator on the government cover ups on UFOs. He ignored her. He slammed his hands down on the table and asked with a mysterious rage in his eyes, "Where were you?" Again, this was unlike Flanders. He was calm and reserved individual. He never had those outbursts. Rosie started to get really scared. This behavior was unexpected. She thought along, could this have been something to do with the encounter with the strange light the other day? Flanders started to glare but at her. Then he caught herself almost as if he snapped out of a trance like state and asked, "Where am I? Who am I? Who are you?" Rosie was confused. What was happening? Flanders was a sharp individual and was very unlike him. What was going on over here? She began to weep. Flanders watched her silently. in a distraught state, not knowing what on earth it was that he could do. Flanders could not for the life of him remember who he was or where he was. He felt great frustration, the likes of which he had never felt before. For some strange reason, he bolted to the safely quickly unlocked the door, took out his Kelt CP-33, fired it off randomly. He ran through the house and he was confused to why he was doing all these different things. He didn't know what made him do these things. He placed the KELT CP-333 to his temple, then clicked it. Nothing happened. But then everything went dark. Then he opened his eyes. He found himself in an interrogation room. The building materials and designs seemed like something that he had seen in the past, but not necessarily in Vermont or other cities in the world. Flanders felt like extremely lightheaded and wondered why he looked down and saw somebody, what seemingly to be Flanders, on an advanced bed. The body was untouched and it seemed to be resting peacefully. He was intrigued on how they existed without having a body. The lightness helped him to feel free, unconsciously strained, limitless. He felt home. Memories flashed. That's when another being came into the room and looked at him. He didn't say anything, but the being communicated, "Hello, Castiel. Tell us all about your time on Earth 1." Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe.